If you want to speak about French-American relations, of course I could tell you that they are excellent, that there are no problems at all, which would be not far from the truth, but there is a little distance. And also, if everything was going on so well, everybody would wonder what the need for an ambassador. So, as I wish to try and retain my job for a few months, let's see things as they are. Well, I think that France and United States certainly need each other, and their relations, the manner they work together, is important for both of the two countries, and also important for the rest of the world. Important for both of them. Well, we all know, coming back in the old days or the not too old days, that but for France, most probably United States would not have been born, and but for United States, France would not be anymore a free country. So that has been rather important for us. But we don't live only on history, we also live in the present times and also in the future. On the present time, I think we need each other on a base of mutual defense. You know, we are part of the same alliance, and we French are staunch supporters of the Atlantic Alliance. It's one of the, or perhaps the main keystone of our foreign policy. We know that we need to have this strategic power in the United States to balance the power of the Soviet Union, but we also know that we don't need and we don't only wish to rely on that American power, that we need to take part in our own defense. And it's for that that we decided in 1964 that remaining members of the alliance, we would have our own nuclear forces and remain responsible for our own defense efforts. This was a rather highly controversial decision taken by General de Gaulle in 1964. Not only controversial in this country, but in most European countries and also in our own country. I think that everybody now in the United States, in Europe and in France recognize that it was a good decision, because it certainly is one of the reasons why France doesn't experience any neutralism, any pacifism, why our defense budget, which was increased this year by 4% in real value, and which amounts to a little more than 4% of our gross national product, which is the biggest proportion in Europe, is voted overwhelmingly by the parliament and is not opposed by public opinion. Why so? Well, most probably because French people, they feel committed, responsible for their own defense, and then they back it. We have made the same analysis on the tilt of the balance between forces of United States and Soviet Russia in favor of Soviet Russia, and it's for that we approved of the deployment in 1983 in Europe of the new modernized American nuclear forces. So there are deterrents, which is the deterrence of the weak to the strong, but which is an added deterrence, is certainly considered as useful for the whole alliance. We need each other also on the economic side. The time is far away where nations could live independently from each other. Now the whole world is economically not integrated but interrelated. If business doesn't pick up in this country, if it's 1 year or 2 hours late to pick up, if interest rates are very high in this country, of course it hurts this country primarily, but it also hurts European countries. We have experienced in France this in the recent year. The present government has tried to curb, not to curb unemployment, but to curb the rate of rising of unemployment through a traditional Keynesian policy, which could have worked if the economy in the United States, in Europe, had showed an upturn. Considering that this did not happen, unfortunately for everybody, we had to change our policy and to revert to the more classical policy of fighting inflation first, which is beginning to prove successful, but which leaves unsettled the other problems. We should have to face together this very difficult problem of the international banking and finance system. Everybody knows, and everybody has heard, if he was in Toronto at this annual bankers fair, which takes place every year, either in Washington or in another place, that it's the main concern of the bankers, but it's also the main concern of all the governments. Everybody speaks about Mexican debt, sometimes Polish debt, but that's only the top of the iceberg. And the iceberg is very, very deep. And if we don't attend together to this problem, if we don't attend together to try and restore some sort of international monetary system, we are at the risk of losing free trade in the world, because you can't have free trade moving when you've got a tremendous volatility in the value of the main currency used in the world. We also need each other to approach and to face international crises which unfortunately occur all around the world. Very recently, in the past months, we have worked hand in hand with our American friends to try and bring some sort of help to find a solution to the problems in Lebanon and the more general problem in the Middle East. We happen to have had a lot of experience historically in that part of the world. We happen to be on speaking terms with all parts which are in conflict in that part of the world, and of course we can try and be of help. We try and compare our analysis of the problems which happen all around the world, and sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. We very openly, very frankly explain ourselves and try to share our analysis and our conclusions. Here is the way where French and American foreign policy can complete themselves. Of course, the United States is a very big country, 225 million inhabitants. We are 56 million inhabitants in France, so we are a medium-sized country, but we both are industrialized country. Our per capita income is the same as the one in the United States, just a little higher, so we are, if I may say, on the same level, if we are not the same size. And we can do a lot together also, and I shall finish here, attending the problems of the third world. Those problems of the third world, we must attend them and try to attend them together. First, because the third world is numerically the most important population in the world. We must attend them first for humanitarian reasons, which are obvious, for political reasons, because if we have a world which continues to be divided between have and have-nots, and the difference between the haves and the have-nots is a little too important, we should definitely be in trouble. And we've got to attend them for economic reasons, because if those countries are developed, they can be a very interesting and very important market for industries and for agriculture. So we've got to think over together this problem of attending the needs of the developing countries. So you see, the task which is in front of us is important, diversified, and to finish by where I started, it means that there is a lot of business to do for representatives of the United States in France and for representatives of France in the United States. Well, will you begin?
Mr. Ambassador, would you comment on the pipeline crisis, and could you make the commentary as to your view of the Reagan administration handling of that situation?
The gentleman is asking for my comment on the pipeline crisis and its handling by the American administration. Well, first, you must always have in mind that this pipeline project started more than 3.5 years ago in Europe with the blessing of the former administration. What was the problem? In most European countries, and I shall take the example of France, because it's not a problem which divides France and the United States, it divides a few countries in Europe and the United States. Our problem is diversification of our resources in energy. In France, we are importing nowadays 70% of our energy, although more than 40% of our electricity is already nuclear produced. Because we've got no oil, we are importing all our oil, 75% from the Middle East, from which 50% from Saudi Arabia. We've got very few reserves of natural gas, and they are drying up. We are importing most of our natural gas from Netherlands, from Algeria. We are importing some from the North Sea, and we are tapping new reserves in the Gulf of Guinea in Africa. And we are importing a lot of coal because our few reserves are very deep and very expensive to dig. By the way, we are importing 10 million tons of coal yearly from the United States, some of which is shipped from Baltimore. And so we don't want to be too dependent on a few countries, and we decided that we needed this Russian natural gas. But as we are not completely dumb, we decided a few years ago that we should never be more dependent from Russia for more than 5% of our energy. We are, for the time being, dependent from Russia for 5% of our energy, mainly importing oil. Before the end of the decade, we should be dependent from Soviet Union by 5% for our energy, but it won't be any more oil, but gas. So we need that gas. It's part of our supplies. What we believe is that the measures which have been taken in foreign countries. We quite accept that that the American regulation applies to this country, but not to foreign countries. And it has a sort of ex post facto appearance, which makes things difficult. About the issue of providing Soviet Russia with hard currency, which has been raised also, let me tell you two things. First, well, it may be useful for Soviet Russia to get hard currency to purchase grain in this country and to pay for it. Second, let's look at the figures. Experts both in this country and in Europe agree that it would provide, by the end of the decade, between 8 to 10 billion dollars to Soviet Russia. If you have in mind that the Congressional Budget Office has estimated the fiscal 83 budget deficit in this country to $155 billion, that was the latest estimate, you'll see that 8 to 10 billion dollars is really a drop in the sea. So I think this argument is not very solid. I think one must not give too much importance to that problem of the pipeline. I think there is a problem there of method, of approach of the problems. We must, and I think it's very important that we sit down together, which we probably have never done until now in the alliance and between the major partners concerned, to try and discuss the overall problems, the overall strategy of East-West economic relations. The latest stage was détente, and we haven't replaced détente by something else. So we need to see what must be our way of doing business with Soviet Russia and agree on some basic principles. And within the frame of those basic principles, decisions will be taken by each country to try and plan it. I think we are on the contrary track if we want to take a definite, distinct decision without having considered together the overall frame.
Your Excellency, I'm sure that the last point that you took was last, not because of the least importance, but probably because you wanted to make a particular significance. And that was in regard to the third world and the more developed countries. We are all aware, and as you are aware, of course, I think you attended the Society for International Development 23rd Anniversary celebration here. We are all aware, particularly were made aware by that meeting, of how significant the future of the world is, that the developed countries and the developing countries shall go in tandem, that the distance and disparity between them should not go on increasing, but at least maintain at the present level or decrease. How do you view the French role in the Atlantic Alliance, but more than that, in relation to the United States, to persuade the United States to play that leadership role which is its due and which is really it falls on US, the leader of free world, to play in regard to the developing countries?
Yes, the question of the gentleman is how do we view the working with the United States to promote the development of developing countries. I think that we've got very good tools. One is the IMF, and the other one is the World Bank with its subsidiary, the International Financial Society. I think they are very good tools. we must use them, and it's for that we have pressed. And with the agreement of the chairman of the World Bank for the 6th and the 7th increase in funding of IDA, which is a very important item also. We've got definitely some reluctance of this country to share our views on the problem, but we are patient, and we, with our other colleagues of other European countries, try to persuade the Americans to join us. And we've got a difference with the United States on the approach of the problem, which is that, of course, we believe that private enterprise, private business must be one of the major tools to help development of the developing countries. But we don't think we can only count on private enterprise, private business. That also we should work through government agencies for some countries where private business has not taken the impact and the importance which it has in industrialized countries. We believe that the way of handling relations with developing countries must not obviously be the same as when dealing with industrial countries. Anyway, in the meeting at Versailles, one of the true achievements which was made there was advancing toward a solution within the global negotiations which could take place within the frame of the United Nations with developing countries, which would mark a conclusion, if I may say, a favorable conclusion of the talks which had been initiated in Cancun.
Mr. Ambassador, you made mention of the international banking and finance system as the greatest tool toward freedom of world trade. We seem to be a conflict with the European community on many things, dumping, subsidies, and whatnot. How do you see the November GATT meetings impacting on this? Do you see any progress in the general agreement in the foreseeable future and the resolution of the steel problem, for instance?
Well, the gentleman is asking my view on the GATT meetings and the problem of trade between Europe and the United States. Of course, this meeting of the GATT is an important one, but in my opinion, it's not at all, it doesn't attend the basic problem. Basic problem is the volatility of the dollar. The dollar is, you like it or you don't like it, but it's the central currency of the world. You buy your oil in dollar, you buy your raw material in dollar, you sell your grain in dollar, and so on. If you consider what has happened for the last 3 years, and the country has happened for the 3 years before those last 3 years, but if you take those last 3 years and you compare the value of the dollar to the value of the Deutschmark, which is central currency in the European monetary system, In the beginning of 1980, you got 1 Deutschmark 0.72 for a dollar. A fortnight ago, you had 2 Deutschmark 56 to a dollar, which is an increase of the dollar vs the Deutschmark of approximately 50%. In a period where German inflation has been smaller than American inflation. So it shows you that there is no more relations between economic problems and the value of the currencies, which leads to the conclusion, unfortunately, that if you want to practice world trade, very often you practice Russian roulette, which is not a very agreeable sport to practice. So, if we don't solve one day this problem and recover the disciplines which we had, perhaps not exactly the same ones because the world has changed and the tremendous amount of short-term credits has completely disabled the system. But if we don't recover some sort of discipline, we should certainly be at a great risk of losing freedom of trade. And for the United States is nearly a self-sufficient country. Remember, 10 years ago, foreign trade amounted for 8% of American gross national product. Now it's up to 18%, it appears. For a country like France, foreign trade amounts to 40% of our gross national product. We cannot afford to lose foreign trade. We cannot afford to lose free trade. We cannot afford to go back for protectionism. On the problem between the European community and the United States, well, it's the same problem when you've got difficulties at home, you try to blame them on somebody else. When you talk to farmers in this country, they say it's the subsidies which are given by the European community to farmers in Europe which create the problem. Let's consider the figures. The trade benefit, the trade balance is favorable for the United States in agricultural products by $26 billion. European community has got in agriculture a trade deficit with this country of $7 billion. And as for subsidies, the budget of agriculture in the United States amounts to a little more than 1% of the gross national product. And in Europe, the addition of the European Community budget, agricultural budget, and each of the states of the European Community budgets, the total amounts to 1% of the gross national product. So the amount of subsidies is practically the same. Applied the same way in some areas as dairy, and applied differently in other areas. But the total is the same. So I think that Europe cannot afford protectionism, and we must certainly try and solve those problems which are very irritating. For instance, France has got trade deficit with the United States, which amounts to $4 billion yearly. We purchase from the United States for $4 billion more than we sell. So we want to try and sell more. And of course we normally don't want to face protectionist measures or protectionist regulations.
I was interested in your wisdom in how we can better relations with the Soviet Union. Every country is in a mad race for military parity. We're talking about economic sanctions and so forth. But I would like to go to the cause of the hostility and ask you what you think we can do to get better relations with the Soviet Union.
Well, I think that first, there is no magic formula. It's very important, if we want to preserve peace, that we keep a balance in the strategic power. You know, since the war, especially during the last 30 years, there has been a sort of balance, which has been the balance of deterrence. The power, the importance, the greater and greater reliability, precision of the nuclear weaponry of first the two superpowers and the few nuclear powers as France has been a major reason. It's not very pleasant, but it's like that, and it has worked. Reason of the fact that the world has been longer at peace than between World War I and World War II. So I think that we must keep that balance, and if possible, keep it at a lower level. Because I was talking to you about the sacrifice which represent our military budget, especially when a country like ours faces economic difficulties. But I suppose that in the United States, when you look at the figures of forecast deficit for the coming years and the possibilities of Congress or the administration to make choices, there again we've got a problem. And in Soviet Russia, where nowadays there isn't any more those 7–8% yearly growth in gross national products, but a flat economy at the best, they certainly are facing the same problem. So maybe that the difficult economic situation in all countries may be the start of wisdom. Unfortunately, I'm rather skeptical personally on not on the qualities of the individual, but of human beings taken as a collectivity. Unfortunately, good decisions are made under constraint. And I'm hoping, if I may say, that all our economic difficulties, both in the West and the East, may perhaps give this constraint to our people to try and find out a solution of a balanced nuclear power and classical weapon power, but at a lower level.
sir, would you comment on the nuclear freeze movement in France?
Well, as I told you, we have got no nuclear freeze movement in France because we've got our own deterrent forces, and we consider that they are necessary for our own defense. We consider that a freeze at the present level of atomic weapons between Soviet Russia and the United States would be disfavorable to the United States. We have made the same analysis as the United States. We believe that the balance has tilted in the past 5 years in favor of the Soviet Union. It's our analysis. We don't say it's the analysis. There may be country analysis, but it's our analysis, and in that way, it's comparable to the United States. But independently from that, as I told you, we've got our own nuclear forces under our own command because we don't think it would be wise to rely only on the United States for our protection.
But my question was about the public is calling for a neutral freeze in the East and the West, and I was wondering about the status of this movement in the public, the very public.
No, we haven't got such a movement in France. You've got it in this country, we haven't got it in France. There is no call for a freeze in France. It's that's the situation. The problem is very different because our forces, everybody knows, they are much weaker than the Russian ones. What we want, where we apply a lot of money at modernizing our nuclear forces, is to keep them credible, so that the deterrent value continues to be useful, prevent any war between or any military action against our country. But we got no freeze movement in France for the time being.
Over the last few years, France seems to have had larger problems with growing inflation than some of its European neighbors. Why is that? And when the current rate of price is lifted next month, what is going to be done to ease growing inflation? Would that include any changes in wage-based tax?
Well, it's true that in Europe we've been better than, for instance, for a long time, Italy and England to control inflation, but much worse than Germany, for instance, or Switzerland. And there have been very good achievements by the former administration in France, but I would say that on inflation, it has never been very successful. For the last 6 years, we've never gone down under two-digit figure inflation. Now, for the reasons I told before, we have gone to inflation fighting first policy, which will most probably tend to give us a 10% yearly rate of inflation this year, 1982, compared to 14.5 in 1981 and 13.5 in 1980, which will be definitely an improvement. The goal for next year has been stated at 8%. When we shall get out of the freeze by the end of October, we shall go back to, as before, freedom of price fixing and wage fixing. But I suppose, on our personal experience, that we shall have some sort of arm twisting and a lot of persuading of the unions of business to try and use restraint. Is the traditional form where it's done. But from what I see up to now, it may have some chance to be successful. Because we know that we cannot afford. Our inflation in the 6 last years has always been a little more than double of the German inflation. We most probably cannot afford that anymore. But it will be a day-to-day battle to try and keep it under control. On the other hand, we must have a slowdown of inflation, but we know also the inconvenience of too sharp decrease of inflation. The decrease of inflation must be something gradual and cannot be independent from all the other figures of the control board.
An interesting new departure of the Mitterrand regime is the effort to decentralize government in France. And much of the rhetoric sounds remarkably like what we hear from the Reagan administration here, returning decision-making to what is called the commune in France. I wonder if you would discuss the origins of that new departure and compare it with what is happening here.
Well, a problem of decentralizing in France. Unfortunately, France was not at all as decentralized as this country even before the Reagan administration. You were a decentralized country, especially compared to us. France has been a decentralized country until the revolution. And then in the Napoleonic era, it has become a very strongly centralized country, extraordinarily centralized, which probably was useful at that time to restore order and to put order in the house, which is completely unadapted to running a modern country. Every decision at local level had to be approved by Paris, which was absolutely stupid. The first who had the idea of decentralizing was General de Gaulle. And he decided a referendum on the subject in 1969, and he had a majority of votes against, and it was the reason why he resigned. The present government didn't rely on a referendum, but passed it through Parliament, where it was voted, and it's beginning to be put in application. Power and some part of budgets being given to regional authorities, with the president of the regional assembly, which is elected, taking part of the powers which were before handed to the préfet, who was the sort of governor but not elected, appointed by the government, who is the all-powerful man in his department. So it's a complete change. And it will take certainly 1 or 2 generations to, if I may say, to be to come as normal practice. Because in matters of state, decentralization is exactly like in business. In business, when you've got a very highly centralized company and you want to decentralize, first you must persuade people to accept the decentralized, and then you must persuade people to accept decentralization, because delegation of power means delegation of authority, but also delegation of responsibility. And people prefer rejecting responsibility to the state than carrying on their own responsibilities. And we shall see more than once a lot of people who will have to decide at the local level, who will try to push it back at national level, to try and get out and get rid of the responsibility. Because if something happens which doesn't work, they would prefer to say it's the state, those over there in Paris, as they say, those over there in Washington. So it's the same story in any country. But on the whole, we are much more centralized than in your country. And but decisions have been taken, law has been passed, and we are on the way. But it will take a lot of time. Then,
I believe that, if I may,
yeah.
I've enjoyed all the very learned questions. I'm just a woman. And if you would be patient with my little more personal question, I'd like to know what you enjoy most about the United States.
Well, I'm just a man. And I would like to tell you, when they asked me if I, because I had retired from business, if I would accept to come as ambassador to Washington, I thought that the United States was the only country where I would accept that task. For a very simple reason. Because during the 35 years I've traveled in this country, I found out the extraordinary friendliness of the United States, which is, I think, unique in the world. When you come to this country, wherever you are welcome in an extraordinarily earthly manner, friendly manner, and this for anybody is the most precious thing.
I am of the impression that unemployment is one of the major problems of most of the countries in the world. What is the rate of unemployment in France, and are the heads of state taking any type of steps to try to come together to help to solve that?
Well, rate of unemployment in France, the number of unemployed in France amounts to 2 million, approximately, which represents approximately 9% of our working force. If I want to compare to this country, it would compare to 11 or 11.5%, because when we've got full employment, the unemployment proportion is approximately 2.5%, as in this country it's approximately 4.5% to 5%. So our 9% should compare to 11%. So it's a very high level. And it has constantly risen in the last 5 years. What were the reasons? The combination of low growth, or no growth at all, in the last period, of population curve, which shows a great increase of the youth labor force until 1985, approximately the same figures in this country, same curve as in this country. A lot of women coming on the labor market, which was unnoticed 20 years ago, and a progressive increase. And fourth, the greatest increase in productivity we have had in this country. All this produces a high rate of unemployment. And this high rate of unemployment is certainly one of the reasons of the change in the administration. And it was for this reason that the administration tried to fight it through Keynesian policy and sharing of the working time. But we immediately faced the limits because of the constraint of foreign trade, owing to the fact that economies in this country and economies in European countries didn't follow suit. So we were completely out of the normal current. And we couldn't continue by ourselves because being so dependent on foreign trade, we hit our head on the wall of our constraint of foreign trade. So we've got people and leaders which are very much concerned because it's our major problem in France. They consider it as a major problem, but we haven't got any solution except upturn in the economy in all the Western countries.
For those of us who have enjoyed France's great burgundies in the past, there's the disturbing report in Mr. Henson's recent book on widespread and significant adulteration of many, if not most, of the great French wines. I wonder whether you could tell us whether the French government will take strong action, or as intimated in Vintage, the authoritative English journal, you will take a page from us and try and ignore the issue.
Well, you know, this problem of regulation for good wines in France has been enacted a little more than 100 years ago. It's a very strict regulation, and it's for that that there is, whenever there is infringement of the Act, the culprit is heavily prosecuted, and well, the penalties are very, very strong. No, I can assure you that the good Burgundies, the good Bordeaux are still the good Burgundies and the good Bordeaux. Taste them by yourself.
There are three parts to this question. I hope you can weave it together. One is the technological changes that are coming in this country. Are you facing the same thing in France? And the other is related to the percent of your national budget that goes for the military. And how do you justify that in terms of the fact that the military buildup does not generate as many jobs as other kinds of investments?
Well, first, on the problems of new technologies, well, of course, we are a country which develops a lot of new technologies and new products. We consider that if we want to attend the problem of developing countries, we must allow their exports to our countries of industrial goods from their newly born industries. And the way for us to continue and compete is to promote, invent, and develop new products, new high-level technology.